And good morning, everyone. It's great to be back here for another Nordics Day. I see that Johan, you ordered up the nice weather for us. I actually don't mind this weather because I live in Austin, Texas, and it's still in the 90s every day, which is quite hot. You know, it's high 30s Celsius, so it's nice to come over here and get a little bit of a change in the environment. It was also good to be able to meet up with a number of you last night and chat about things, catch up. To get started this morning, I wanted to talk about something that I think is what brings us together here, and not just at this event, but really at a lot of events like this all over the world around OpenStack and around open source communities in general, and that's really around collaboration. And this year I've been talking a lot about a concept that I call collaboration without boundaries. And I think that that's something that I see a greater need for than ever before. And at the same time, if you look at our world, we don't always have great collaboration, and we don't always have the ability to freely collaborate across different boundaries that we've created. But I think that in the open source world, we have the opportunity to actually change that and do something that's really effective, that is very productive, and ends up delivering a greater result for all of us collectively. And so the way that I think about this is on a couple of different fronts. I think that, we work in the technology industry, and we know that even traditional organizations, traditional industries, are going through a lot of changes right now with kind of the digital transformation that's happening in everything. And whether you're talking about finance or medicine or even kind of the hard work of manufacturing, government, defense, anything like that, technology is really becoming more and more impactful and important in every single aspect of our lives. And so I think that that's a very powerful area to impact our day-to-day life. And as I've said, I think that collaboration among individuals is something that we need more of. And what we have an opportunity to do in this community is to think about how do we apply those concepts of collaboration and technology to really move things forward in a meaningful way. And so I'll give a few examples of where I think open collaboration is producing good results, and then talk a little bit about the impacts that we've seen within OpenStack. Johan told me to bring some stats, so I have some stats that kind of show the results of that kind of collaboration. And then I want to talk about some thoughts that specifically have to do with open source and the impact of open source on our industry and on cloud, and where there's some opportunities there. So if you think about collaboration, and especially collaboration without boundaries, I mentioned that I believe that technology is a big opportunity, but it's not just solely confined to technology. This is a group that's called the Silk Road Ensemble. And it's a musical group that was brought together by Yo-Yo Ma. Have any of you ever heard of Yo-Yo Ma? Yes, a couple? Okay. We have a few music nerds out there. So Yo-Yo Ma is a classical cellist. He's probably the world's most famous cello player. And he grew up as a very talented cellist, playing with world-class symphonies from a very young age. Went on to do pretty much everything that you can do in a successful classical music career. And a few years ago, he said, you know what, I want to do something that's a little bit different. And I want to get together people and instruments that wouldn't normally play together. Not just a standard symphony setup playing the standard repertoire, but let's do something that actually has the opportunity to kind of create something new and create a new experience for the musicians and the audience. And so he kicked off this experiment that was called the Silk Road Project, and he brought together musicians from Syria and Iran and China, Galicia, the US, all over the world, and they brought instruments like a pipa. They brought together musicians who played traditional music styles, and they came to Tanglewood, which is kind of a music festival in the US, and they sat down and started trying to make music. And there's a documentary that came out last year about this that I found really interesting. But at first, it wasn't that great. it was not beautiful and interesting music. They had to figure out, how their pieces fit together. And over the course of several weeks, it came together in a way that was really surprising for all of them. And what they figured out how to do was to take the different experiences and the instruments and the backgrounds and the cultures that each of them brought, and to combine them together and to create something that was really new and interesting and beautiful, rather than something that conformed to kind of the standard rule book of what classical music meant. And I think that's like I said, that's not a technology example, but when you look around at some of the members of our community, I think we see similar things happening. This is the Globe of Innovation at CERN, and if you ever get a chance to go to CERN, it's a really interesting place to visit. This series of OpenInfra Day and OpenStack Day events had one of them that occurred at CERN in May. I was able to go there, take a tour of the Large Hadron Collider and different experiments, and talk with some of the scientists. And that, again, is a collaboration without boundaries. It literally sits on the border of France and Switzerland. So they're bridging the borders there. But they have scientists who are visiting there from all over the world and doing research on all kinds of aspects of physics and the universe and matter. And again, it's this incredible production that comes out of it. They're also a massive user of OpenStack and Kubernetes and other open source infrastructure systems. They run hundreds of thousands of cores in their environment to process these massive amounts of data that come off of all of their scientific experiments. And OpenStack itself is another one of these global collaborations. It's been about 9 years since we started OpenStack, and that's a long time for for an open source project to continue to move forward, to progress, to grow, to have releases and contributors and users and everything coming along. And I think that there are some key things that have enabled that to happen. And really, this attitude of collaboration without boundaries is one of the core aspects to it. And if you look at the results, what we now see is we have a community that's 105,000 people in 187 countries. And so, we have a group here today in Stockholm, but when you come and you join this community, it's not just about the group here in Stockholm. You're really joining a global community that has representation in every time zone, in almost every country, in many languages. And as you contribute code to OpenStack, you're contributing code to thousands and thousands of organizations out there who rely on it. When you make use of OpenStack, you're getting code from about 10,000 software developers who have contributed to it during that time. And so that's really powerful as a way of building technology and thinking about how do you find more smart people to work with. You can't hire all of them. You can't have all of them in your business. Well, one of the ways that you can do that is join open source communities that are big and that are productive and that have experts in different technologies in them. I mentioned that it's been about 9 years. We've done 19 software releases. We're about to do our 20th software release just in the next week or so. So this is a system that has worked and worked consistently. All of these releases have been on time too, which is I think not always a guarantee in the software world. But this, so when I talk about a big collaboration that's global, sometimes people go, "Well, isn't that chaos? How's that going to work?" Well, it does. It works very well actually. And this project, 9 years in, is still one of the top 3 most active open source projects in history. So the 3 most active are the Linux kernel, Chromium, and OpenStack. And they all have 55, 60, 65,000 changes a year that go into their software base. So this is, again, it's something that works. It works at high scale. It works reliably and consistently as a model for producing great technology. It's also something that is very big in the commercial sense. 451 Research just released a report that pegs the commercial market for OpenStack at $7.7 billion US. And this is just for OpenStack itself. So buying software and services related to OpenStack. This doesn't include hardware purchases and things like that you would be buying to build out a cloud. But this is great because what this means is investment that can go back into the software and into the community. And again, when you join a community like this, it means that you're benefiting from the collective strength and the collective investment of all of the people who are participating. And there are hundreds of companies who are part of this community and part of the OpenStack Foundation directly, both as gold and platinum members and as corporate members. Again, representation from all over the world. So that's all, I think points to the fact that we've created this healthy, broad, big ecosystem of companies, of developers. They're producing a lot of software. They're doing it reliably and consistently and on a continuous basis. But what I think is actually the most important part of it is how does it get used? And what is it for? This is a chart that came from an IDC report. And it's interesting because I always like to show this one because it hasn't changed much over the last few years. But a lot of times people get a narrative in their head that, especially I think in the US and in Silicon Valley, that what cloud means is that everything is going to go into just a couple of providers out there. It's all going to be in AWS and Microsoft or Alibaba or something like that. But what the research has shown is that, at least for now and for the last several years, we've seen pretty consistently that people are mixing different kinds of clouds. And yes, public cloud is growing very, very rapidly. Private cloud is also growing. Hosted private clouds and different form factors where people can maintain single-tenant environments and security and meet regulatory requirements. Those are all driving an adoption of a breadth of different types of clouds. I think that that's a really important concept, especially here in Europe, where I think we see some leadership in the realm of data rights and data privacy that sometimes we in the U.S. maybe don't invest as much in, at least not soon enough. But I think that there are really important regulations and compliance requirements out there that in a lot of cases actually have some good basis for why they exist. And it's hard to meet all of those needs if you have a mindset of everything is just going to go to Microsoft and Amazon. Not only that, what we've seen from many of our users is that when they take an approach of considering multiple kinds of clouds, they can get huge cost gains. Some of our users who have been very large public cloud users and then have repatriated their standard workloads save 70 to 80% on the cost of those workloads running them in a private cloud versus in a public cloud. And it kind of makes sense because when you go to a public cloud, you're paying for flexibility and convenience and the opportunity to turn it off at will. And that's not something you need to do if you have a workload that you understand that's steady state. And so, this is, to me, a really important thing to keep in mind, that there's always, especially in the tech industry, there's tons of hype, and then there's the reality of what people are doing and what's actually working for their businesses. And as you look at OpenStack specifically, one of the things that I would say we've seen within our user base in the last 2 years is a lot of growth, but also a lot of variation in the industries that are consuming OpenStack. In the early days, it was very much tech-forward companies like PayPal and Walmart and others who were investing in big development teams and a lot of technology investment that was tied to their business, but not necessarily their core business, but was still a big part of their business strategy overall. And now what we see is, as that digital transformation wave is sweeping through more and more industries, we see so many different companies who are kind of picking up that flag and carrying it forward and making use of these modern open source technologies. We did one of these events in Berlin just last week, I think it was, and heard from both BMW and Audi. Volvo spoke at another event about 3 weeks ago. So the auto industry is a pretty traditional industry, but is facing electric cars, autonomous cars, a whole shift in kind of the transportation industry overall that requires them to be much more agile and software-like in how they approach their product development. And so we see trends like that. In China, we have a lot of hard infrastructure, so not just kind of the technology infrastructure, but the power company, the train companies, the different utility systems that are adopting clouds and private clouds and edge clouds to run and scale their infrastructure systems that are the largest in the world. And so again, I think that's another important point, is this is not something that's just about technology companies or a technology initiative within a company, but it's really key to businesses across industries, and it's key to being able to build a flexible environment that lets you rapidly adapt to whatever the market change is going to be, because so much of that now is driven by software. So that's some stats, some data, some names, some of the people who are involved in OpenStack. But I said that I also think there's opportunity here in Europe, and this philosophy that is at the heart of collaboration without boundaries is something that has really been embedded in our community from the very beginning. We had a set of principles that we call the 4 opens, and this governs how we work together, how we communicate, how we produce software, and what it comes down to is it's really all about having access and a say in the process from the very beginning to the end of an idea to code. So the 4 opens are open design, which means that as you are thinking about how to implement something or what to implement, that should be available for discussion, for review, for input. That idea itself should be up for review and debate. As you write the software itself, the open development process should be available. It shouldn't be something that happens just somewhere inside of an office and then gets thrown over the wall. Open source obviously is a key part of it. That means licenses that guarantee access to the code. In perpetuity, we use the Apache 2 license, which is a very common license, very business friendly. And an open community means this kind of activity is welcomed and encouraged to bring users and potential users and companies, partners, everyone together to sort of determine where we should go and what direction we should go in. And this is something that I think, if you look at the open source world overall, this is a set of techniques that we've used that have had delivered some really great results for us. In the open source world overall, though, there are other approaches, and some of them are I think, frankly, struggling right now. because they don't necessarily follow all of these opens. Some of them are projects that are mostly controlled by one company, and we've seen instances where a commercial company has struggled and started to remove the rights of users to the software, or where a company has restricted what partners and other commercial entities can do. So thinking about how you do collaboration really does matter, and it has real consequences and impacts for your community overall. And I think that in the space that we're in, and in this event, having a bias towards openness and collaboration is really important, because what we're trying to do is build fundamental pieces. And so what do I mean by that? Well, cloud is sort of the overarching bubble that we're all in. This is the lens by which we view a lot of the work that we do. And when cloud first came out, it was mostly about virtual machine provisioning. And there were kind of two paths that it developed along. One was the proprietary public cloud path, and one was the open source path, and there were a couple of different open source clouds out there at the time. The thing that was very much in common in that first generation in the early days was that you had to invest a significant amount of resources to adopt either path. When AWS first came out, it was so different from the way that people were used to working that it required a lot of effort. There wasn't a good tools ecosystem around it. People didn't understand exactly how to make use of it. And early open source products were just raw and immature and needed time to develop. The thing that I think is key, though, to keep in mind is if we look back 10 years ago when all of this was first starting to develop, there were many, many things that cloud did not do. And there were many use cases that were not a good fit for cloud because it was lacking simple things like IPv6 or the ability to manage different types of hardware, whether you wanted that to be bare metal or GPUs or specific kinds of network gear for telco use cases. A lot of gaps that were there. What's interesting to me, though, is if you look through this and you look how many of these problems have been solved in the intervening time, it was actually through open source communities that were solving these. OpenStack had IPv6 support well before any of the proprietary clouds did. OpenStack had bare metal support well before any of the proprietary clouds had a bare metal offering. If you look at container orchestration, the big winner in that space is Kubernetes, which again, is an open source project that delivered. Scale out storage, you've got Ceph, and this is just a handful of examples. TensorFlow I mentioned on the machine learning side. So even in something that, again, going back to that sometimes that perception that cloud is all about public cloud and that just a couple of leaders, the truth is that those companies are not driving most of the innovation. They are delivering the innovation, and they are operating the innovation, and they're making it accessible to a lot of people. But open source communities, organized well, are actually delivering on tons and tons of innovation. And this innovation is available for anyone to take advantage of and to build it in the way that makes the most sense for them. Whether that is a cloud here in Sweden, a Europe cloud, a government cloud in Germany, whether it's a distributed cloud around the world, a telco cloud like AT&T is building in the US. Many, many, many form factors are being developed, and that is really what is so powerful about open source. You bring together experts, you get them to work on problems, hard problems together, and then you open up the access to that technology, and you let people take it and extend it and use it in new and different and better ways. So, this is kind of an example that I've used before, but if you look at what you need to do to run machine learning, you need to have some infrastructure. That infrastructure needs to be programmable and scale out. You need to have an application framework that you can upload the basic control code to, and you need to have some kind of a machine learning framework. And if you want to do that, you can meet all of those requirements with completely open source technologies. And you can mix and match different tools in at different levels here, and deliver what is becoming a really critical capability for businesses everywhere to be able to take the massive amounts of data we have and gain knowledge and insight out of it. And this is again something that these tools, open source is leading the way. Open source is the most advanced technology, and we see the proprietary clouds actually adopting Kubernetes in as their container managers, building TensorFlow in to their machine learning toolkits. So it's very interesting to me to think about this trend and what it means for cloud. And I think that as we go along, I don't think this is something that's going to change or slow down. I think this is going to continue to accelerate. If you look at what other trends are out there, whether they are development related, data related, the open source space is just continuing to produce incredible IP and incredible technology. And I think that we're going to see that be a trend that accelerates and grows, and those will be adopted by public clouds, by private clouds, by hybrid clouds, and that's what I think is where we're going to see cloud go over the next few years. So, to wrap up, back to where I started, all of this is made possible by a group of people who have decided to come together, who've decided to work in the open and to collaborate on solving hard technical challenges, and then opening up that work so that anyone can use it and take advantage of it. And I believe that with the way that the world relies so much on technology today, joining these kinds of open collaborations and participating in them is one of the best ways that we can impact our world, that we can impact our businesses, and that we can make a positive force out of all of the time that we spend on technology and on our companies. So thank you for having me, and thanks to the organizers for putting this event together. It's going to be a great day, so look forward to chatting with you all.